If you've ever seen a person in this painting era, you've probably seen that person in puffy sleeves. These puffy sleeves are a result of stuffing, or bombast. And it wasn't just the sleeves that were stuffed. Bellies, shoulders, and thighs would also be stuffed. Men were known to pad their calves as well. Bombast was made from various materials, including cotton, wool, horsehair, and bran. The stuffing used was not light and soft like the large shoulder pads of the 1980s. Instead, the bombast was quite uncomfortable. The trend fell out of style in the mid-17th century. The blio was a long gown worn by wealthy men and women. The blio was one of the long garments worn during the late Middle Ages. This garment used a substantial amount of fabric, due to the high amount of drapes and pleats used in its construction. Blio worn by women were tighter fitting in the upper arms, shoulders, and torso. However, the sleeves were extremely wide from the elbow down. The sleeves would extend all the way to the floor. While the gown for women would be floor length, men's were shorter. A blio worn by a man would only reach his ankles. The male version was loose-fitting, with the sleeves extending at the wrist instead, too. You think 3-inch platform shoes are high? Those are nothing compared to this 16th-century shoe, or chopine. A chopine was a high-soled platform shoe that could be as tall as 20 inches. Chopines, although impractical footwear, served the practical purpose of protecting the wearer's feet from mud and dirt along the streets. Chopines were often worn by Spanish and Italian women to show off wealth and social importance. The higher the shoe, the higher the status. Women required longer dresses to balance proportions, which required more expensive dresses. Attendants would also be used by wearers to help maintain balance. These high shoes may have had roots in ancient Greece and Rome. There are early images in Greek mythology of Aphrodite wearing high platforms. After the Romans invaded Spain, they established a cork shoe making industry. Like many other fashions, the chopine was not to last. The 17th century saw the beginning of the high-heeled shoe, thus ending the trend. Crinoline was a popular fashion trend starting in the late 1840s. The crinoline was a petticoat made from horsehair. The crinoline was initially used to support and give shape to a woman's dress. In order to achieve the large skirt look, the crinoline was worn with 6 starched petticoats. This was heavy and uncomfortable to the wearer. The crinoline took different forms during its popularity. In the 1860s, it changed to a dome shape. By about 1865, it became nearly flat in front. By 1878, the crinoline was no longer popular. It seems strange that as the women's suffrage movement was gaining momentum, a new fashion trend would limit a woman's movement. But in the 1910s, the hobble skirt was a hot fashion trend. The hobble skirt was a snug-fitting skirt that was cinched at the ankles. Where women used to walk and glide freely, they were reduced to only taking the tiniest of steps. Regardless of this limitation, women were more than happy to ditch their heavy petticoats which the hobble skirt replaced. As the trend took hold, modifications to the skirt allowed women better mobility. Streetcars and trains reduced the height of their entrances to accommodate the skirt wearers. Hidden slits and pleats were added to allow longer strides. Public figures denounced the trend and media were staunch opponents. Newspapers took every opportunity to publish stories about women with twisted ankles and broken legs caused by the hobble skirt. The hobble skirt trend was short-lived. By 1915, the First World War had begun and the hobble skirt didn't seem to fit in with the times. Perhaps when you've heard the song Yankee Doodle, you were puzzled by this line, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. After all, who can't tell the difference between a feather and a piece of pasta? However, in this song, macaroni was not a piece of pasta. Rather, it was a fashion trend. In the 1760s, young British aristocrats were returning from a journey across continental Europe, known as the Grand Tour. This was a standard trip intended to deepen cultural knowledge. These young aristocrats also came back with a new sense of fashion known as macaroni. The macaroni trend was seen as a type of effeminate dress. It incorporated bold colors, while the traditional dress at the time favored darker clothing. Flashy shoes, tight pants, and short coats were also part of this trend. The trademark of this trend, however, was exaggerated wigs almost as tall as the wearer with tiny hats on top.